All right, everybody, come on in. It's my real pleasure to be joined by Tom Nichols. Tom writes a brilliant writes brilliant pieces for the Atlantic. He taught at the U.S. Naval War College for 25 years. He writes books that matter, including his 2023 book, Our Own Worst Enemy: The Assault from Within on American Democracy. You've seen him all over other media. He's out there everywhere on social media, on cable TV, on broadcast TV, on everywhere you can imagine, because he has a lot to say. Tom, I've taken so much from our conversations over the last few years that I wanted, as we approach our 250th birthday, um, to do something with you and maybe a select handful of others to have this conversation. Imagine we are at dinner. We are lingering over dinner. The bottle of wine is open, and the topic is our American democracy. Right. So, the first question I want to ask you is like, who else is at that table? Who would be great to have that conversation with? I have my own list, which I'll share with you, but I'd love to hear yours.
You mean living or dead?
Well, I was thinking living. Dead is another interesting question, but living.
Uh, well, I think, rather than default to, some of the, celebrities, I think I would rather have a group of ordinary citizens from across the political spectrum who need to sit and learn how to talk to each other about things like American democracy.
Well, that's
Uh,
fun.
instead of saying, well, former President Obama or,
Yeah, yeah.
so I mean, I think um, I would want to put together 3 or 4 people that just never encounter each other in real life and say, and make them actually realize that these other people exist and that they don't have horns.
Yeah. I mean, it is you're bringing up such a good point about the bubbles we live in, right?
That some of us live in.
Well, some of us.
Most of us live in some kind of a bubble, but the separation and the sorting of American life is really killing us, and we're doing it on purpose. I mean, we're doing it to ourselves. We've really decided that the most important person in the world is us. The next most important people in the world are people who agree with us. And we don't really want to ever encounter anybody that isn't part of that circle. And, um, it's disheartening, because we're losing our identity as Americans. And we're even losing our identity. I mean, we're not reverting to where we were 250 years ago, where we'd say, well, I always loved that line in the John Adams, miniseries on HBO, where someone accuses Adams of betraying his country. And he says, Massachusetts is my country, sir.
Yeah,
Um,
we're not there
you
yet.
know, we're not even back to that. We're back to my country is this small pod of people that I happen to agree with. I mean, in a sense, we've become very small and very large at the same time. So, people say, "What's your community?" And it's like, well, it's a half dozen people who agree with me, and then it's the millions of people I interact with on Facebook or something.
I mean, was
Uh,
ending the draft a bad idea?
well, now that I'm 65, I can say it was.
Yeah, I mean, and you didn't. People didn't want to go to war. People don't want to have to be forced to give up a couple years of their lives for service. But the idea that we encountered other Americans that we would not otherwise encounter in large numbers had an effect.
Well, we encountered, and all kidding aside about my age, I mean, I actually did try and join the military when I was younger. I'm colorblind, so they sent me on my way, as it turns
Mhm.
out. The Navy tried to recruit me, and then they kicked me out when, they found out I couldn't read, maps in color. Uh,
Well, you got them back by teaching there for all those years.
well, it is kinda
Yeah,
strange, when I started teaching there, I was 36, and one of my, I mean, full time when I was teaching her full time. One of my colleagues said, we really should get you a commission. And I'm like, dude, I'm pushing 40. You had your chance. Now you just got to pay me a lot of money. Um, but the thing that the draft did, yeah, it forced people together who had never met each other, and it gave them a common enemy, which was their drill instructor or their company commander, because a lot of them didn't wanna be there. So you said,
Yeah.
"Well, I'm gonna do my time, I'm gonna get out," and then, I'm part of a small group of people, or not well, actually, I'm part of a reasonably large group of people who have all had the same experience. In my last book, I suggested that the compromise for this was something I called, a summer of service, which is
Mhm.
and not volunteer service, not like picking up trash for AmeriCorps or something. I mean, military service, where for 6 weeks, after you graduated from high school, because 6 weeks isn't gonna kill anybody. Kids go off to, vacation in Europe, on, spirit quests for longer than 6
There are
weeks
very
after
few
high.
human beings who don't waste 6 weeks.
Right. So, you graduate in, June, and you come home in early August, and you've spent 6 weeks. You learn how to live in a barracks, you learn how to make your bed, you learn how to show up, in the morning for chow, you learn how to fire a gun, which I think would demystify guns. I think most veterans that I've ever encountered, especially from the Vietnam and later eras, don't have, they're not really fascinated by guns because they had to live around them. I also grew up with cops who you know, don't have a lot of romance for guns. Um, and then you have a choice. You can say, "Hey, if you liked this, you can stay in. Pick a branch of service. We'll send you off. You get credit for basic training. You're in better shape than you were 6 weeks ago. And if not, you get a certificate that says your country thanks you for showing up, um, and we will call on you if we need you.
Mhm.
But other
I
than
mean,
that,
the
go
idea
on with your life and go
yeah,
off to college or whatever you're gonna do."
and but the importance here is, the reason why we're in this discussion is the country seems fractured, and we're looking at ways of mending that fracture.
Well,
Yeah.
and things these communal activities, break down the biggest problem in American society. I think the biggest problem in modern society, which is narcissism.
Well,
It's
that's yeah, well, that's I mean, wealth inequality might be atop of my list, but,
I know, I know that that's pretty common answer, but I would argue that narcissism is the root of
it's a
everything. Well, first
bigger
of all,
yeah.
I'll just argue with you, Ed, and say most people don't really experience wealth inequality in any way they can put their finger on. They experience near wealth inequality. That is, and we know this from studies, that people resent the inequality of the people who are closest to them socioeconomically. They don't really
Mhm.
resent Jeff Bezos because most people cannot conceive of being that way.
With
They
that
don't
kind
know
of
what it would
wealth.
be like to, like, rent Venice. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, and taxpayers paid for that, but well, it's,
they
by
don't
giving them a big
this
tax.
is
Yeah,
it's like trying to explain the space program. I mean, it's so far
yeah.
out there, whereas most people, where they get really mad is they look at their neighbor and they say, "Why do they have a new car? How did they get a new car?" There's even a thing, and I wrote about this, in this last book I did about narcissism and democracy, called the HGTV effect, where people go and they watch these home renewal programs, and it
Mhm.
spurs them to spend money they don't have because they're saying, "Well, how come everybody else is putting in granite countertops?" I talked about,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
if I see you have an audience, or I can't see your audience, but I have gotten a lot of sheepish looks at live audiences when I've said, "How many of you gone on Zillow and creeped around other people's houses?" You know?
I get those hearts if you're one of those people who've done that.
Yeah,
Come
yeah,
on, be honest. There we
yeah. There
go.
we go. And so, that's the kind of that's to me, that's where income inequality comes in. But I'm sorry, I just compared to, you and I are close in age, compared to the standard of living that we had 40 years ago,
Mhm.
Americans live better than they've ever lived. I'm saying there is no way around that. Even Barack Obama once said, "You would pick no other time in history to be born than now."
I agree with that.
So
I'd argue
if you
that, Tom, for a different reason, for a reason that's relevant to the whole. This particular is like some other times in history, a time that really matters, where what people decide to do matters, because we're at that inflection-y point where you know uh, the moral weight of what you decide to do every day turns out to make a difference, and for young people,
but if you're
that is,
totally
they don't
wrapped up
like it, but it's a gift.
if you're wrapped up in your own thing, if you're wrapped up in your own narcissistic bubble,
Yeah,
you don't think about what the moral thing to do is. You think about what's good for
that's
you.
right. That's
And that's to me,
that's
that's the problem is that that civic that sense of civic voluntarism is gone. If you think about and the middle level organizations in society, fraternal organizations, clubs, things like that.
mhm.
Robert Putnam, the Harvard political scientist, he wrote
Going alone.
25 years ago, yeah, that people he ascribed it to too much TV. He said people that are watchers, people that are watchers are not participators. But you could just substitute screens in general, but also, and I'm going to say it again because of the economic point here, that this is kind of a knock on effect. It's a second order effect of prosperity that
I
people,
agree with that entirely,
people just have the
entirely.
time to withdraw into themselves. They don't have to cooperate to do big things anymore. I'm a work at home guy, right? I mean, I'm a writer.
Me
Even when I was
too.
a professor, I loved working at home. But the fact that we spend so much time in our homes, even before the pandemic, we spend so much time in our homes. We spend so much time by ourselves, has turned us into a mean and ornery people and you cannot sustain democracy on a bunch of I'm going to steal a line from Peggy Noonan here, who I don't often agree with her politics, but she was a pretty good
Good
speechwriter,
writer.
good writer, and she said we have become a nation of sullen paranoids, and I
Yeah.
think she got that exactly right.
Well, okay. I'm gonna change the subject. That was good. Um, but because you taught at the Navy, I got to ask you this. JD Vance and the great minds of the GOP like to talk about Western culture as if they have some clue what they're talking about. So I did this thought experiment in advance of our conversation and thought about my top 5 naval battles of all time. Only I have a tie for 5. And all but one of them, in my view, is a sort of decisive battle for human freedom over something else. Um, and then I think about our wanderings in Venezuela and our clueless efforts in Iran, and I wonder what Western culture these guys are talking about. I mean, my naval battles are Salamis.
I was gonna, if you didn't start with Salamis, I was going to have to just start lecturing you.
Thucydides is my guy.
Well, for your listeners, Salamis, as one historian put it, the Battle of Salamis. This is where the Athenians, after the Athenians and the Spartans, who normally hated each other, um, managed to join forces to defeat the invading Persians, who were the superpower of their time. Remember, Greece, all of Greece itself is only about the size of Alabama. And the Persians are this gigantic empire that is pushing into Southern Europe. And the Greeks and the Spartans decide that we might not like each other, but we're all Greeks and the Persians are barbarians. And so the Spartans become the land army and they hold the Persians for a while at Thermopylae, the infamous battle of the 300, right? But they
Right.
don't. But that's just a delaying tactic. What what the Athenians are doing during all this is moving their navy into position to take on the Persian fleet and isolate the entire Persian army where it will be destroyed because in the end, every major war is about logistics. And the Persians get way overextended. Their navy gets defeated at Salamis. And I love the expression from one historian. He said, the Battle of Salamis is why Western civilization existed at all instead of people sitting on beautiful rugs smoking hookahs on the shores of the English Channel.
Yeah, that's right. Am I gonna do this? Am I really gonna do this? I am. Excuse me one second. So, I first encountered the Battle of Salamis in 4th grade, and I'm gonna do something that's embarrassing, but in 4th grade, I drew this picture of Themistocles. That's right
It's
right
not
there.
bad.
That is a 4th grade drawing of Themistocles.
All right.
Okay.
I don't know.
So Salamis was
I
the top
mean,
of
I
my
don't know
list.
whether
It
to
was a
admire
battle for
that or if
freedom.
I would have stuffed you in a locker for doing that, but it's pretty cool.
I got then my next one is the only one on the list, which I don't think was a battle that made us any freer, and it's Actium.
Mm,
You
okay. Um, yeah, the future of the Roman Empire kind of hangs there, but okay, close enough.
yeah, not human freedom, really. But Lepanto was my next one.
Oh yeah, again, the great face off between what by this point is Western Christendom and the empires of the East. Yeah, could have but could have gone either way, and if it had gone the other way, it
You're
would have been revenge for Salamis.
right. Right? So then I move up to Trafalgar, which I'm not a big Napoleon fan, so I view that as a victory for freedom, but I know that's debatable.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that the axis of the world turns on Trafalgar. I might have said, the the something more like Yorktown. Um,
Well, then my next 2 are they're tied. It's Midway and
but
Mobile Bay.
Trafalgar is important because Napoleon, like you, I am not a fan of Napoleon. I mean, I couldn't figure out why Napoleon lies in state in France. Um, I mean, when you kidnap the Pope, you shouldn't lie in state later, but okay, that
Right,
the French it's a French thing. But yes, victory and basically caging Napoleon once and for all at sea,
right.
is an important, battle.
Yeah. So I didn't have Yorktown, although I agree with you. I had Mobile Bay and
Mhm.
Midway are my next 2. And both of
Midway,
those
I'm gonna say this though, I might have replaced Midway with the Battle of the Atlantic. But Midway is a majestic and accidental turning point, and Midway actually, I keep bringing up Midway in the context of Iran because for a year and a half, the Japanese do not understand that winning battles, which they're doing, I mean, from Pearl
mhm,
Harbor until mid 1942 at Midway, the Japanese are winning one battle after another, but they don't realize they're losing the war. And my only argument about Midway is that if Midway hadn't happened, it just would have taken longer to defeat the Japanese. But they
mhm.
had the amount, and I think you could almost say this as well about the Allies. Um, and once the Japanese and the Germans had awoken that much productive capability, they were going to lose the war no matter what. It was just a matter of when and how long. And as one of the Japanese admirals said, "Listen, I've been to Detroit." The only admiral that was really concerned about attacking us was somebody who'd actually been here. He's like, "I've been to Detroit. I've been to Chicago. I've seen that. You don't understand the size of the dragon you're waking up here." And so I think now, had England fallen, um, and that the Atlantic had, from Norway to Athens, from Oslo to Athens, had become just one big Nazi lake from the Mediterranean to the Atlantic. I don't know that we would have been able to prevail without trying to reach some kind of settlement. There's a
Mm.
wonderful book, by the
Yeah,
way, Fatherland. It was made into a very bad movie, but it came out probably about 30 odd years ago, which was an alternate. It was a murder mystery set in a world where England did fall and the United States and Germany, enter into a Cold War.
mm, mm.
It's real. Oh, I just saw somebody mention the American experiment, so I'm gonna flog
Yep.
that while I'm here, Ed. We just dropped that. Netflix just dropped it yesterday, The American Experiment. It's a 5-hour, mini series about the founding. I'm in it, thank you very much, but I am actually, not the, not I'm just a small participant. There are many more famous people involved in there, than me, but I highly recommend it. It's a great way to celebrate the 4th.
Well, so Tom, we took this I took us on this detour through naval battles,
Mhm.
in part because I look at what our government is doing with our military around the world and who they're siding with, and I wonder when they talk about Western culture, whether they understand what it is.
No, they think that when I think when a lot of these guys in the MAGA movement use Western culture, Western civilization, they mean white Christians. And that's
Okay,
all
well,
they mean.
white Christians were an important part of Western culture, but they
Well
were the people in it. They weren't
well,
Western
again,
culture. That's what
these are
they
remember that these white Christians 200 years ago in the United States thought of my people, the Greeks, as, swarthy, dark grease balls. Remember that
Right,
remember
they did.
remember, It's a Wonderful Life, where Mr. Potter says, "You're sitting around playing nursemaid to a bunch of garlic eaters." We
Yeah,
weren't considered, real Americans or, part of that. I mean, white Anglo-Saxons, um, you know, and Western civilization is about something much bigger. It's about a way of thinking. It's about inquiry and logic and scientific investigation. And politically, it's about, I mean, really, I think that Western civilization reaches its apotheosis in the Declaration of Independence. That you can't go any,
now
you
I'm gonna
can't,
argue with you about that, but
well,
okay.
not in terms of what we achieved, because we haven't lived up to the promise of the Declaration, but you can't go much farther than to say, look, every human being has rights that are inherent in them as human beings, not
Yeah,
because they were born someplace, not because they are subject to a particular king, not because of their skin color, their religion, whatever. All human beings are endowed by their creator. And of course, Jefferson was not the most religious guy.
right,
But the idea that it is eternal, that you have rights that inhere in you by virtue of your existence as a human being,
yeah.
and that those
Well,
rights cannot be bargained or taken or negotiated away. And to me, that is all of this is kind of the downstream of the Enlightenment, of the notion that that human beings have reason and that they can apply that reason to understanding the world around them and to their relationships with other people. Now,
yeah, I'm in a
I know
combination of
where you'll go and say those were fine words. We haven't lived up to them.
no,
No,
that's
but
not where
what we're
that's
trying.
actually not where we're gonna go,
Oh, all right.
but
Sorry.
yeah, the combination of reason and divine spark, yeah, made us all yeah, I think that's we managed to put faith and reason together in Western culture in an amazing, way, that led us to the Declaration of Independence. Um,
The different, and if you want to contrast that with something non-Western, um, to say, um, I'm trying to think of who the author was who said, that the Western civilization has this kind of questing. One of my friends put it this way: try to name any other civilization that was as curious about other civilizations as the West, which I always thought was our strength, right? In
right.
part, now, why does that happen? Maybe it's because many of the Western countries were maritime nations or seagoing or exploring, whatever it was.
Well,
This is not
Tom,
an argument for the West is best. It's simply an
not
argument
that
to say the West
for the West is
this
different.
questing nature to it.
I mean, China was a seagoing power. They had the biggest navy in the world, and they burned it down because they said there's nothing interesting in the rest of the world.
Well, I had a Muslim
Their
imam
point
in
of
one of my
view.
classes years ago who said, "Well, he said the and we're here at the U.S. Naval War College." He said, "But the Muslim nations had the world's largest navy at the turn of the millennium in 1000 AD." And I said, "Yes, but you didn't go anywhere,
Well, they traded. They were trading. It
right?
was
But
it
within
was
a very
clearly,
small, right? But within a very small
almost even Batuta was not.
in a very small circumscribed area of it was very
Yeah,
it was, what's the word I'm trying it was utilitarian. It was meant to trade, and
yeah.
it was a huge navy, but the idea of just getting in ships and saying, "Let's just go see what's over there,"
What's out there?
you
That's
know?
why we went to the moon. Like, what's out there? Yeah. So we have run out of time, and I'm just gonna say this was the appetizer course for that
Yeah,
meal that we're gonna talk about the country, because I wanna actually follow up with you and tell you why I don't think the Declaration of Independence by itself is the apotheosis of Western culture, but that's gonna have to wait for another time. Tom, fabulous conversation. I really appreciate it.
thanks, Ed. Thanks for having me, and a happy 4th, and please, everybody, don't let the sourness of the time we live in take away your celebration of the 4th. And what we're celebrating is eternal and not dependent on any one man or any one time in history.
Totally agree with that. Thanks, Tom.